Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And today we are bringing you part 2 of our interview with Dr. Gina Stamm, who specializes in all things intersectional feminism in France. And before we get into this, quick correction. Gina wanted you to know we misspoke in the last episode, and she has not written any books yet. She's written articles in academic journals and chapters in edited collections, but no books, again, yet. But still, a lot to dig into in the works that she has done. If you didn't hear part 1, go back and listen to that, because it gives so much context, and it's really a good foundation for what we're going to be talking about in this episode, where we break down a lot of the current issues around women in France right now. So if you haven't listened to that yet, go listen to that and then come back. But if you have listened, then let's get into the interview.
Okay, so we're talking, wow, we're getting so much. It's going to take me like the rest of the day to chew on all of this information I'm learning because, again, I French culture is not my forte. It's not something that I've studied specifically. Language, obviously not. As I said, I need a lot of note cards and help. But with all of that, there's some big conversations that are happening around women and feminism in France right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of give us an overview of the public discourse around some of that?
Yeah, so I'll try to do this as efficiently as possible, and I'm going to leave stuff out. But, well, so I do want to address abortion really quickly. There's been this, so it wound up in the Constitution after a couple of attempts. And this is the push for this primarily came after Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US, and also after there started to be calls on the far right for limitations on it. And so there was this fear. They were like, if Trump can happen in America, it could happen here. It needs to go in the Constitution to make it more difficult to undo. The right to abortion, that amendment did not get in. The freedom to abortion, to have an abortion, did get in. So this isn't nothing, but I want to tip my hat to a legal scholar named Sabrina. I don't actually know how to say her name. I've never said it out loud, but Sabrina Erin-Jin, who explained really clearly the difference between the freedom and the right. If you have the right to have something, that's a positive entitlement. And not only are you not going to be punished for it, but you need to have access to it. If you have the freedom to do something, you're not going to be punished for it, but there may not be the concrete protections for your access to that. And this has become evident recently, one, because you've seen, despite what are supposed to be legal protections, you've seen the return of clinic protesters in France. And you've also seen, because the current government has been starving the public health system in a way that we've seen it obviously in the US insofar as we ever had a public health system. The UK has seen this as well. The current government, Emmanuel Macron's government in France, has closed a lot of hospital beds, and they're really understaffed. So there's a medical desert problem that isn't comparable. Like, I live in Alabama. There are a lot of places where you cannot get to a hospital within an hour. So distances in the US mean that medical deserts are bigger and more serious. But compared to the situation that existed in France in the past, you're now getting medical deserts. And so a recent statistic that came out is that 1 in 4 women have to leave their department, which is the administrative area. So it might be comparable to a county, I guess, like if we think, but they have to travel to go get an abortion. Again, the distances in the US are much bigger. The abortion deserts are much bigger, but this is a new thing. And also, when you look at the statistics, which they do have by economic status, women who are more financially precarious are more likely to need abortion care. And so if 1 in 4 women has to travel, that means that a disproportionate number of financially precarious women have to travel to get abortions. And while the procedure may be covered by their national health insurance, that travel is not. So there's that. Gender-based violence. And I know I brought it up a few times. I want to put a huge content warning on this section because it's extremely ugly. So you have a pretty comprehensive set of legal protections, but their enforcement and the ways in which accusations are taken seriously is really troublesome, or not taken seriously is really troublesome. This came up recently I'll talk a little about Me Too in a minute, but there was also another sort of social media hashtag that was started by an activist called Anna Tumazov, called double peine, or double punishment, where women who were going to report sexual assault were being basically run through the ringer. Their testimony was refused. They were, the very traditional sort of, oh, what were you wearing? Were you drinking? But even beyond that, where like one woman called to report a rape and they put her on hold, but she could hear the policeman saying, oh, it's that slut again. Yeah. The numbers of rapes that are reported, and then from report to investigated, and then from investigation to prosecution, I don't have the exact data compared to the US. They're not good in either place. So, and there are also, very strong social norms that govern that as well. There's the question of feminicide. So what is feminicide? It means it's a woman who is being killed for reasons related to her gender, whether that's not exclusively domestic partner violence, because it can also mean like when an incel mass shooter shows up, or if someone is killed for turning someone down for a date, things like that. This is where it's really hard to compare the US to any other country because feminicides are not tracked in the US. So I can give you the data from 2021, but the numbers don't match up exactly. So in France, in 2021, there are 930 homicides. 122 of those are feminicides. In the US that year, there are 21,462 homicides. So for a country that's about has a population that's about 5 times bigger, we just in general have 20 plus times the number of homicides because we have guns. Mostly.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Sorry, that was sarcastic.
Of those 21,462 homicides, 4,970 were women, and 1/3 of those are estimated to be domestic partner or intimate partner violence. But that doesn't map directly onto feminicides. So you could look at it as per population, we have approximately, but the numbers aren't the same, twice as many domestic, like intimate partner murders as you have feminicides in France. But if you look at the percentage of murders overall that are feminicides, it's kind of the same. So if there's a listener who's better at statistics than I am, then those numbers might make more sense to you. But and France within Western Europe that's an elevated number. And there have been attempts to address that. It's a little bit down. Last year, I think there were 93 identified. That's not all women who are murdered, but women who are specifically murdered for gender-based reasons. So it's down, it's not gone. So moving on. Me Too. So it caught on
I
very...
really wish we were recording to like, we should publish this recording just because our faces and the reactions we have in these subjects is just like telling. And it's like, so just for you listeners, Gina just literally covered their face with a giant sigh when this subject.
Yeah.
So it starts out, like, it gets sort of immediate uptake in France in 2017 when the ball really got rolling. And especially because there were some very high-profile people, including Asia Argento, who were part of the Weinstein thing, but who are very visible in France. It got also some really immediate backlash, public backlash from very high-profile people and from very high-profile women. There was an open letter signed by about 100 prominent women, including recognizable film stars like Catherine Deneuve and people who would have in the past called themselves feminists, who said that the right to impose oneself sexually was necessary for sexual freedom. So saying that Me Too was damaging to sexual liberation of men and women. And then you also have this discourse where it's like, seduction is a cultural value. And that's where I wish you could have seen Annie's face right there, because so there's this meme. I don't know if you remember the meme of Andrew Cuomo when he got caught having harassed a bunch of his, and the headline was, "I'm not a pervert, I'm just Italian." Like, because he was like, "I'm Italian, I touch people," and people are like, "Not like that." And this is where there's using the defense of a cultural identity that values certain kinds of contact, whether it's Andrew Cuomo saying, "I want to touch people," or whether it's people saying, "We're a very romantic people. Seduction is important to us, and we don't want to be Americans and be too puritanical about these things," which seems to get rid of an awful lot of gray area in between there.
Mm-hmm.
You also, so that is not uniform at all, but that was a big part of the public discourse. So you also get the issue in that the César, which are the French Oscars, the year is escaping me right now, but so France continues to be very friendly to people like Woody Allen, or people who've been accused of sexual misconduct, or people like Roman Polanski, who have been convicted of sexual misconduct. And even though they're like, well, you need to separate the man from the artist, and he won, his film won Best Director or Best Picture. I think it was Best Picture at the César. And notably, the actor Adèle Haenel, wonderful actor. I don't know if you've seen the movie Portrait of a Lady on Fire. So the blonde woman in that movie, Adèle Haenel, she got up and walked out yelling shame, which was extremely brave.
Yeah.
And she basically wound up retiring from making movies shortly thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
She's a wonderful sort of lesbian feminist activist, love her to pieces. She has done a couple of things that are really amazing. One is that she has done that. She's spoken out about misconduct over and over again. She brought a lawsuit against a director that she was working with for not specifically rape, but like sexual misconduct with a minor when she was between the ages of 12 and 15. And last week she won. And it was not clear that was going to be the outcome of that. The court case was so ugly. the sympathy, the amount of sort of public sympathy for him was gross. And he's just been sentenced to 4 years, 2 of them suspended sentence, 2 of them in house arrest, and 5 years of not being able to work with minors, which I don't think is enough.
Wow.
But the fact that she went out on a limb and torpedoed her career, and she was like a very well-regarded, young talent, to make the point that it's not okay. The big Me Too is children. It's not me saying this needs to be talked about in France. This is a number of public figures. Obviously, that's the case all over. It happens all over. It happens in churches all over, in families all over. But the cultural acceptability of sexualization of children has become a big topic of conversation. And a couple of things have come up. One is a book called Consent, which is by a woman named Vanessa Springora, where she writes about, as a child, like a very young teenager, she was raped, but in the context of a years-long relationship with a very famous author who, for decades, was very clear that he was having relationships with very young girls and very young boys. And everyone's like, oh, what a creative man. He's just writing these wonderful books. And then she came out with this memoir being like, no, me. It was me, a real person. And this created a public reckoning that has not ended. And then you also have, there's an edited volume that's come out, directed by Iris Bray and Juliette Drouard. I don't know Iris Bray very well. Juliette Drouard, they are an amazing sort of writer and activist. But it's the name of the book is incest culture, like rape culture, as in a cultural norm that makes it possible and makes it okay, and sometimes romanticized, to abuse children in that way. So again, this is not specific to France, but certain cultural norms around it are not the same from culture to culture. Juliette Drouard is also part of a collective volume called Politicizing Childhood, which doesn't have a translation yet. I hope it does. It's a good set of essays by people from a number of different fields talking about what are the ways in which we have taken children's agency away in various different situations. Okay, coming to the end of this. I'm sorry. So another thing that's come up recently in the same context is the Gisèle Pelicot case. Mm-hmm. So for those who don't know, this is an older woman. It was discovered because her husband got caught upskirting someone at a grocery store and his phone got taken away, that he had been drugging her and inviting strangers from the internet to come rape her in their home and filming it for about a decade. And he went to trial this past summer with 49 of the men. There are about 30 men who have not been identified. There are what to unpack in that? One, that she had been to the doctor many times to be like, I'm falling asleep. I have memory loss. I have gynecological problems. I don't know what's going on. And at no point did someone propose to her, hey, I think something really wrong is happening. The men who are now convicted, because they were all convicted with varying degrees of severity, were from all walks of life, including one of her neighbors. So professional men, working class men, all ages, fathers, married, In addition to the 30 that have not been identified, there have been several who said, I sort of was into this, or the husband offered it to me, but I said no eventually, and none of them reported it. The doctor who supplied the husband with the sedatives has not been identified or punished. And there were pictures of their daughter on his phone as well, who had obviously been drugged, and so a lot of things were not addressed. There were a lot of ways in which this was a big wake-up call to many people who for whatever reason, it had not occurred to them that anybody could be a rapist, even if they seem like a nice guy, even if they're a good family man, whatever. So this is a big wake-up call. It also became an opportunity for some of the most regressive attitudes about consent to be aired in public, both from the defense lawyers, and you could say that's their job, but also in the press, etc. So you have the defenses that were, I thought she consented, and this was just some kink that they had. That you had the people whose defense was, I thought she was dead. You had the people whose defense was, it didn't occur to me, once I had the husband's consent, it did not occur to me that I also needed the woman's consent. And you also have the defense attorney, because all of this is filmed, and the videos are being shown at the trial. And you have the defense attorney saying, well, he's caressing her. It's not rape. Yeah, it's also gross. And so you have a giant point of reckoning, but what the outcome will be is really unclear. And you have the current, I think he's currently the Minister of Justice. He used to be the Minister of the Interior, but who says, I think that we should put the idea of consent into the law. That sounds great. The idea of positive consent in the law is what it's like in Spain. It's what it's like in Scandinavia. But there are a couple of problems with that. One is he's a credibly accused rapist. The only reason it didn't go to trial is that the statute of limitations had run out. His text messages where he was in charge of social housing and imposing his, favors, if you're going to be euphemistic about it, on women who are trying to get an apartment. Those have been leaked. So I don't think he knows very much about consent. And the other issue that was also brought up by Sabrina Eranjan, the legal scholar that I was talking about, is that once you have consent that is written into law in a specific way, then it becomes the question of how to get around it for defense attorneys, which makes it harder for you to say, I didn't consent. I don't know if I agree with that 100%, but it is something to keep in mind when thinking about writing positive consent into laws. And then you get the president who comes out and he's like, oh, Giselle, because one, the only way we know about this is that she as a victim was like, I want it to be an open trial because I'm not the one who should be ashamed. They should be ashamed.
Right.
And so you get the president who's out there being like, oh, Giselle, you're a real hero. We're with you. Well, where the were you? Sorry. When you were saying that Gerard Depardieu, who also is facing many charges of sexual misconduct, is a national treasure.
Mm.
So, and the president it was recently leaked that he was using a whole bunch of slurs in cabinet meetings, including calling the female members of the legislature cucut, which is, by the way, if you're going to use a derogatory term, 19th century prostitute is a weird one. So
He's just throwing it back. It's fine.
yeah.
Oh, there's so much. I don't know what's going on. Like, I've not heard anything about Depardieu. Like, that's news to me. You just
Oh yeah, he's
gave me newsflash.
It's really gross.
Really?
So then we get the turfism, or as they've designated themselves, because they're like, oh, if feminists are trans friendly, then we're femalists. So there are a lot of people who would identify this way, but there are two sort of public facing figures. One of them is actually a former member of the group Femin, which is in the news a while ago, like a feminist public activism group. And then she was also one of the founders of the feminist collage group that started actually in response to feminicides, making these sort of guerrilla graffiti collages that say, like denouncing crimes against women. But there was a split in 2020 between this founder, Margaret Stern, and the group itself, because the group was like, yeah, we're also defending trans women. And she was like, well, then I'm not part of this group anymore. And she has since, so with another woman named Dora Muto, who was a sort of public sex education figure, they've come out against the veil. They're very anti-sex work. So TERF, SWERF, however you want to say this. And they have gotten, they have been more and more rejected by sort of mainstream feminist discourse. They've gotten closer and closer to far right, even neo-Nazi groups. Dora Muto has gone so far as to really praise Jordan Peterson. Margaret Stern, who was against, has apologized to the Catholic Church for supporting gay marriage. And yet somehow, when there's this debate over a conversion therapy ban in France, who is getting received by a cabinet member? These two. And they are on the edge of what's also known as femo-nationalism, which is people who identify as feminists, but are saying that in order to protect women, we have to protect them from basically Muslims and immigrant men.
What?
Yeah, they claim to be universalist feminists. So there's like the same thing is good for all women, that women are most threatened by Islam and in general non-European immigration. This is represented publicly by the Nemesis Collective, that has done a lot of acts of vandalism. They've done false flag acts where they were like wearing a hijab or burqa and being like, yeah, we're Islamicists. We want Sharia in France. Yeah. And they are also very closely related to some neo-Nazi violent extremist groups in France. They really took ownership, among with other right-wing nationalist groups. So a very tragic thing happened. A young woman named Philippine Lenoir de Carlon was killed last fall by someone who had been given a deportation order. This is a similar situation to the Lake and Riley case in the US, where it is a tragedy, and the person who did it committed a crime. But where there is a hyper visibilization of crimes committed against white women by immigrants. And that is used as an excuse to do damage to due process for all immigrants. And then also, on January 23rd, the current Minister of the Interior, Bruno Retailleau, was confronted with a member of Nemesis and was like, I want to congratulate this young woman for her activism. And then later he walked that back because he's like, oh no, oh, sorry. And it's like, well, so those are kind of some of the hot button issues going on right now. I know that wasn't a real, let's put it this way, not a joyful note to end on.
Well, that's what we are over here.
That's about right. Right now. Yeah.
Do you have just a brief note about something joyful you are excited about?
So I gotta say, the young queer people are f***ing awesome. But the amount of like collaboration and public scholarship and art production that I see from them is so heartwarming. And like, I don't want to be like inspirational in that, like, but no, it really inspires me to go do stuff. And I like really interesting writing projects, art projects, collaborations. I mean, like even the stencil, things like that. And the way, and so that's something that I'm very excited about. I am concerned about our future. I'm concerned about their future. Concerned about a lot of things, but that does make me very happy to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's about right. I think that's how a lot of us feel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Gina, for coming on. Please come back because we gave you these huge, broad questions.
We did.
You nailed it, but we would love to dig in more. But in the meantime, where can the good listeners find you?
So I am not on any public-facing socials because that's ended badly. But if you want to keep up with any of my writing, a bunch of it is in open access. So if you Google Gina Stamm, you'll find my professional page. A bunch of the articles that I've written are linked there. I've translated a really cool science fiction novel that's already out called Mevlita's Dreams. I don't get any more money from that, but I also think it's awesome. And then there's another novel that's more historical fiction by the same author that's coming out in October that I would encourage everybody to check out. That's it's called The Inner Harbor, and takes place right before the handoff of Macau from Portugal to China in the late 90s.
Yes, I'm very intrigued by all of this. Thank you so much for being here. Listeners, go check that stuff out. And this brings us to the end of our interview with Gina, who was such a delight, so informative,
Mm-hmm.
just so knowledgeable. We had so many questions we wanted to ask after the interview was over. So hopefully Gina will come back in the future because there was a lot more we wanted to get to.
Right.
We covered a lot of ground, that's for sure.
For sure.
Yes. In the meantime, listeners, if you would like to contact us, you can. You can email us at hello@stuffmonevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at MomStuffPodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.